The whole thing was a CIA operation. For the people that want to know...
Well, why, though?
Yeah, so the why is that... And this is the high-level overview. You can find all the evidence and details on my Twitter and on my YouTube streams, but this was a CIA operation against China by the United States. China would have been taking the 20 Freescale semiconductor engineers. They would have been trying to force them to defect, get the technology from them, essentially. So what we've got going on here is that China, United States, probably Russia, we're all trying to figure out this technology. China's trying to steal it from us. And we conducted this elaborate counter-espionage operation, which includes a fire on the plane in the cargo bay. We can see the heat signature right there a second ago. And why they did this orb thing to the plane, they basically forced the plane to turn around. They get it away from China into the Nicobar Islands. We have coordinates. We know exactly where this is happening. And then they deploy these orbs right before the plane is actually about to crash into the water. This plane's flying very low. Those are low altitude clouds.
And you're saying they teleported the entire plane somewhere else?
The plane. They teleported that plane. That is not an annihilation we're seeing happen to the plane. We have to have conservation in physics all the time. So if something disappears from over here, it's got to reappear somewhere else over here. It's actually a closed loop teleportation protocol, meaning that there's a point A and a point B. Like, you know, in some of the sci-fi movies, like if they have like a warp gate and you have to go through that warp gate, that's what they're actually doing.
But so in your view, this version of teleportation is actually moving it in a higher dimension or moving it through space-time?
And that's what we're going to talk about here today is how is this all actually possible? And how is it possible, like what we just saw there, that a plane can just vanish and almost look like it doesn't even displace the background? And the answer to this is gravity wave.
What's the when this happens, there's this big burst.
Yep.
Now, there have been people claiming that this is just a stock graphic that can be used by anybody with video editing software, and they claim to have found the source of it in a video game and then compared it to an old 90s DOS video game.
Yeah, I remember that. The shockwave debunk. Yeah, it doesn't match at all. It really doesn't. I mean, just go ahead and do a pixel comparison or do a shape comparison. It's similar, obviously. I think that somebody just did a reverse image search, you know, and they found an effect. The problem is you look at that effect up, it doesn't even have the same number of frames. The stock effect has like 7 frames. There's only 4 frames in our thing. None of the frames actually match at all. They're like, oh, well, they just did some compositing to flip it around or what have you. Well, okay, let me make it simple. Who's the guy that did it, right? I've got billions of impressions. These videos are famous. They're making me money because I'm putting them on my YouTube channel. Nobody's copyrighting.
And the person who would have been alleged to have fabricated could simply just come forward and...
Anytime they want. And we had a $150,000 bounty for a while going on. Guys, there is no hoaxer of the videos. I get it, and this is what people do, is that they don't want to believe something's real, so they come up with like, oh, this looks like this, therefore it must be this or that.
You know the funniest thing about it is, I keep seeing these stories where they're like, this has already been debunked, and then they reference some YouTube crew, and I'm like, in journalism, the fact that an expert says I disagree with it is not called a debunking, it's called a counter-opinion.
Exactly.
So if... they said, I looked at it, and my expert opinion is that it's CGI. I need only then one person who's a CGI expert to say no, and now it's a moot point. That's why it's not debunking anything. Yep. And that's why it's typically hard to debunk things. I'm not trying to make it seem like you can, you know, it's impossible. It's an easy thing to do. It could just be very difficult, if it is, to prove to people who want to believe it.
I think that the scientific method, one issue I have with the scientific method is that they tend to say just because you can't reproduce something, that means it's not real. Just because we can't detect it, that means it's not real. They're attempting to debunk potential with the you know, the phenomenon that they're unable to replicate the potential. So I agree.
So and that's what you're right, actually. And that's what how is this possible? The answer is 0-point energy. And you say, okay, the first question is, if there is this big answer that, you know, allows teleportation, free energy to be possible, why haven't academics figured it out? What's going on? What's the big holdup? Like, it should be this giant thing. There should be a bunch of evidence that supports it. And there is. There's a bunch of experimental evidence that supports we are in a medium. And that medium of space-time is made up of 0-point energy. And then the question is, well, how much energy actually is there in this 0-point energy field?
Well, so real quick, well, we got a NASA scientist here. Is what he's saying? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, lots of things. You know, we can theoretically explain that phenomena. So you mentioned about the first thing you said that use laser created the orb, power the orb, and you have a black trace in the back. Is that what you said the first time?
Yeah.
And then after, you mean the orb locked in with the object, the laser is no longer, that black trace is already gone. Is that right?
It's a little bit more but yeah, so the use at first to engage the plane, they are expelling propellant from behind them.
That's right.
And then
yeah.
after they've locked in, it looks like it switches from no propellant behind anymore and just laser in front, pulling it forward like a tractor beam, yeah.
So seems like Ashton already had the answer. So that's the laser focus, the laser beam, the trace of a laser beam. So initially they try to power your laser beam, power these orbs. But once they lock in, okay, it's a second mechanism, right?
Yep, second mechanism.
When they lock it in, the internal carried the beam and start to trace, just like a magnetic called coherent locked in there. And then actually they can trace that one and actually interact, can attract to them, follow object. So you have an answer, yeah.
Yeah, so, and then how are they locked in like that in a triangle formation? Look up magnet inversion. If people look at magnet inversion up, you say, okay, I have one positive magnet, I'm surrounded by negative, and then I put those next to each other. What happens is you get to a point where they attract, but then they lock in and they won't repel or attract, and they get locked into a perfect orientation. That's what we see with the orbs. Why are they in a perfect triangle formation?
Well, look at this. We've got a UFO floating right there in the middle.
Oh,
of the room.
yes.
So
The motion. When you orbiting some things, you lock it in because the orbital motion generates called the centrifugal force, right? Counterbalance, that's attraction force.
and something that starts in motion will stay in motion, right? So it's keeps spinning. Yeah, go
There was a story recently about a U.S. Air Force pilot who encountered one of the Tic Tac UFOs, and he said that it flew up to his plane and then locked in place. And when he would bank left, it would stay perfectly locked with the plane. Was that guy just lying, or is it that these things actually exist? What I find fascinating about this claim and this story is, regardless of the veracity of the video itself, the idea that there could be orbs flying around is, this could just be another UFO video. They've released tons of them showing phenomena very much like what these orbs are doing. Not in the same way, of course, spinning around the plane and then the plane disappears. Yeah. But we've got tons of stories of the Tic Tacs locking in place, flying alongside U.S. aircraft. There was just a story the other day where a former U.S. Air Force pilot said that he encountered a UFO. It was flying alongside him. He looked to his left and it was just there, flying with him. We've got, dozens of stories like this? So is it really hard to believe that something like this could exist?
No, it's definitely real. And, there is something to this UFO phenomenon. To me, the bigger question just is, what is it? And I've seen you interview a lot of these people in the UFO, connected to the UFO community, or even congressmen. I think I was watching, I think it was Eric
Burleson, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you had Tony Merkel on as well. It was a good conversation, but, respectfully, I think none of the congressmen have any idea of what's going on with this. They've been kept in the dark for the most part. There's a possibility that some of them know, but we have figured out this technology, whether or not it comes from aliens or ancient civilizations, or we're just using that as a
Or just
cover-up.
people.
Yeah, or just people, right? Just people doing stuff. Like the stuff we're seeing in these videos, aliens aren't going around zapping airplanes. That's human stuff. That's human behavior that we see. And so, sadly, I think a lot of people, it's just too far beyond the paradigm for people to think that we have stuff like teleportation technology or that free energy could actually be real, when we've been kind of brainwashed to think that, oh no, it violates the first and second laws of thermodynamics. And so I think that's the big struggle for people to kind of wrap their brains around this. Because the craziest part for me was that I would thought the UFO people have been like, oh, Ashton's found these videos. This is crazy. This proves that aliens can get here, because otherwise there's no way they can get to us. It's too far away, right? But instead, no, they were like the most hostile about all of it. Almost like, I was like taking away their favorite toy or something related to this.
This is one of the weirdest things. And I mean it with all due respect, but the issue of MH370 is not the top of the news cycle nor the political cycle. I got to be honest, it's a story that exists, but the amount of hate, the amount of individuals who have dedicated all of their time to harassing you and trying to discredit you is weird. It's very weird. Like the fake book thing that was happening, I'm like, okay, hold on. I don't get that level of hate. I get death threats. I'm like, this is weird.
It's possible that it is government agents or power structures that are afraid that if free energy gets dispersed to the human race, that we'll destroy ourselves by dropping it on the ground.
Well, let's clarify. Efficient energy.
efficient. It's not actually free. They say the thing about free energy and what they'll say it can't exist because you can't get more energy out of a system than you put into it. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Well, the truth is there are no closed systems in the universe. Energy permeates reality. So you might see an expulsion here, but that it's coming from somewhere. Just because you don't see where it's coming from doesn't mean it's not coming from somewhere.
So when you say free energy, instantly the naysayers say, aha, that's fake. It's not real. No, hold on. Efficient energy. This is increasingly what humans have sought to be doing through our advancement in technology is more efficiently control energy. That's basically everything that we do.
Yeah, and when you watch the MH370 videos, like that's a good explanation for it because we see this plane get blipped out of the sky, but it's not this massive amount of energy release that we would expect from conventional understanding of physics. It's just this tiny little blip. But that Boeing 777 represents a huge amount of energy due to its mass.
I'm gonna throw it out there for the anime nerds.
Yeah.
In Full Metal Brotherhood, Full Metal Alchemist, Brotherhood, and the original. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that at all. Mm-hmm. It's they live in a world of alchemy, and they can draw circles that control the flow of alchemical energy, and so they can draw a circle on a rock, and then the rock will reshape into a spear or something. Mm-hmm. There's one guy, however, Scar, who has markings, but when he tries to transmute, things explode. And they describe it as, in the show, he's not completing the process of controlling the energy. He's stopping halfway, which is the destruction before the reformation. The reason I bring that up, somewhat just to shout out all the nerds who are getting all giddy and excited because I like Full Metal Alchemist, but when we look at what we're doing with atomic bombs, for instance, that is simply the destructive process. We've figured out a way to release tons of energy. We can't control it. So this tiny object that we have can release an insane amount of energy, and it's destructive. Yep. What would happen if humans actually figured out how to take extremely dense forms of energy and then control what that energy does in an extremely efficient way?
Yeah.
So instead of just having it explode, guide the energy in certain directions. How could you do it? I'm just saying if the technology advanced to where you can have a tiny little bit of uranium blow up a whole city, or antimatter, antimatter explosion, substantially more powerful. If we could actually control how the energy flows, you could do tremendous things. So right here, for instance, you can see on the screen we have this UFO floating, and it's a magnet surrounded by other magnets. It's quite simple. Yep. If we, or I should say when we, because I believe it is possible, maybe we already did, figure out how to utilize all of that energy that's in such a tight space, not just to create an explosion, but to guide that energy in a solid direction, we can levitate things very easily. There's tremendous amounts of energy all around us. Yep. So let me put it like this. An atomic bomb uses a very small amount of uranium or MOX plutonium, whatever it is we're using, to make a explosion so massive it can vaporize an entire metropolitan area, depending on which bomb you're using. If all of that energy in such a small space was just focused in a very tight space upward, instead of forcing everything around it at hundreds of miles an hour outward, it would just hold itself.
It might have something to do with developing a magnetic monopole when you're talking about teleportation and momentum through what do you call this visceral reality? But they don't exist naturally in nature, from what we know, and you got to create it artificially because every magnet naturally splits into a north and a south. But if you can have a magnet that's just a north, then you can aim it and have great propulsion.
I've seen weird stuff they've done where they've like bent magnets so they can create awkwardly positioned poles, and then they use that for various tools. I was watching a video, it was like a TED Talk or something. I don't know. I feel like you got to explain. Are we crazy?
Oh, no. Actually, make a lot of sense. And so I want to make a comment. One thing about Ashton just mentioned about what is the laser, the black trace of the laser beam. So the principle is no different than we use a radar locked in fighting airplanes and follow the trace. But laser is a more high energy, more modern technology to trace. So this is very common. So there's nothing to be surprised about.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon. So subscribe and come hang out.